Chapter 9. America, at last. The Feindom docked at Hoboken, New Jersey. There, Mama, Marion, and Albert were met by the family of Papa's sister Clara, who, with her husband and daughter, had emigrated to the United States in 1938. The Blumenthals were taken directly to Tanta Clara's small, immaculate apartment on West 161st Street in the Washington Heights section of Manhattan. From the moment we left the ship, Marion recalled, I was in a state of bewilderment and awe. No city in Germany or Holland had ever had so many tall buildings as New York. So much motor traffic, so many people, such noisy, bustling streets. And I had yet to ride in the fast-moving elevator of a skyscraper or to descend into the rattling and screeching subways. Immediately, I found a friend in my cousin Helga, who was a few years younger than I. She shared her pastimes and her companions with me. Tanta Clara, meantime, tried to make us as comfortable as possible. She cooked us delicious meals. I had only one fault to find. We had arrived in America just as the Passover holiday, with its many food restrictions, was about to begin. I could make do with eating matzah, our unleavened bread, instead of raised bread, but many sweets that I'd been looking forward to were not kosher for Passover. Above all, here in the land of chewing gum, slim, sugary sticks in many flavors and chiclets galore, I had to wait 8 whole days for the holiday to be over before I could indulge my craving. Bubblegum was a new variation that fascinated me. A few weeks later, when I learned to use the subways, I sat gazing in wonder at the huge bubbles that some of my fellow passengers were able to blow. Almost as dramatic were the sharp, cracking sounds they made as their jaws clamped down on the gum. I soon learned that to chew gum, especially in public, is not a very mannerly thing to do. I suppose it was the abundance of it in the United States, as compared to its scarcity in post-war Holland, that impressed me so. Like the Blumenthal's brief stay with the de Laffey family in Amsterdam, their time at Tanta Clara's in New York soon came to an end. As kind as their relatives had been in both instances, Ruth knew that she and her children must somehow make their own way. On arriving in the United States, the Blumenthals had registered with Hayas, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. While Hayas tried to find a Jewish community that could offer the newcomers a place to live and a temporary means of support, the organization moved them into a residence hotel on Manhattan's 116th Street. The 3 of us, Marion said, lived in one room, with a bathroom in the corridor that we shared with other families. As there were no proper cooking facilities, our meals became very peculiar. Albert had developed a terrific appetite for canned fruit cocktail. It was nothing for him to finish a 16-ounce can at one sitting and go right on to open another. I, on the other hand, had a passion for fatty foods. My favorite was a big jar of mayonnaise, into which I dipped one potato chip after another, out of the biggest bag I could find. It was no wonder I was putting on weight. At the age of 10 and a half, just after our liberation, I had weighed 35 pounds. Now, in the spring of 1948, at age 13 and a half, I weighed 135. In 3 years, I had gained 100 pounds. Ruth was quietly indulgent of the eating habits of her 2 teenagers. She did not take as much pleasure as they did, however, in the American snack foods or in other aspects of American popular culture. She was far too taken up with worry about the problem of starting over. She had no money and no job skills that she could apply without a knowledge of English. She felt completely lost in her new surroundings. To me, Ruth confessed, the future looked bleak. The Blumenthals had been rooming in the Manhattan Residence Hotel only a few weeks when they were notified that Hayas had found them a more permanent place to live. It was being offered by the Jewish Community Council in Peoria, Illinois. Peoria, Marion said. We had never heard of Peoria. I'm not even sure we knew enough American geography at the time to have heard of Illinois. New York itself was strange and new to us, but at least we had relatives there. In Peoria, we wouldn't know anybody. However, we had no choice. If we did not accept the free housing and the chance for work and schooling in Peoria, we would lose our Hayas sponsorship and would be entirely on our own. Without a proper wage earner in the family, there was no way for us to survive financially. So we packed our few belongings and set off by train for the American Midwest. On arriving in Peoria in June 1948, Ruth, Marion, and Albert discovered that their apartment, in a rundown part of town, was to be shared with two other families. Everyone would have to take turns using the single bathroom and preparing meals in the kitchen, which was equipped with an old-fashioned wooden icebox. But at least here was an opportunity for the newcomers to establish themselves in an American community. That very summer, Marion said, each of us got a job. Mama, finding nothing else open to her, started work as a housekeeper for a prosperous family in town, the Hokins. Albert was hired by a local jewelry store. He scrubbed the floors and cleaned and polished the showcases and counters. And I went to work in a laundry, sorting and folding clothes for 20 cents an hour. I also began to take lessons in English. In September, I entered public school in Peoria. I was still so far behind in English, however, that I was placed in 4th grade. There I was, a 13-year-old among 9-year-olds. Not only was I 4 years older than my classmates, but I had also grown plump and was beginning to mature. My teacher tried to be helpful, but she was a rather nervous person, as I recall, and she spoke very rapidly. I could not help feeling out of place and uncomfortable. Although I excelled in mathematics and in European geography, English was my big stumbling block. Along with Dutch and Hebrew, it was my third new language in 3 years. Albert was also wrestling with English at school. Yet both young people continued at their jobs, putting in as many after-school hours as they could, for every penny counted. Ruth's work at the Hokins brought in some extras too, for her employer was generous with take-home food and with hand-me-down clothing for Marion that was still in fine condition. In December 1948, Marion recalled, we celebrated our first Hanukkah in Peoria. This 8-day festival of lights fell close to my 14th birthday, so Albert bought me a special gift, one that was typical of the new luxuries that were available to us in America. When I opened the box, however, I was so disappointed that I actually started to cry. I suppose I had expected a box of elegant chocolates or some other confectionery treat. Instead, he had bought me a pair of sheer flesh-colored nylon stockings. Nylons had first made their appearance in America shortly before the war. Then, as the miracle fiber was needed for parachutes and other war materials, it had become unavailable. Now, in 1948, everybody was clamoring for nylon hosiery. But to me, getting my first pair of nylons was a sign of having to grow up, of becoming a young woman. This I was not ready to do. I was not ready to say farewell to the childhood I had never had. I wanted sweets and games. I wanted to be as carefree as my 9-year-old classmates, who knew nothing of the deadly concentration camp in which I had spent the 9th and 10th years of my childhood. The following year saw an all-around improvement in the lives of the Blumenthals. Ruth learned that her long-time skills as a seamstress had good earning power, and she went to work for a local tailor. Later, she advanced to an even better job doing alterations and custom tailoring for a downtown Peoria department store. Albert, who was enrolled in Peoria Central High School, had kept his job in the jewelry store and even gotten a raise. He worked his way up to an assistant clerkship, increasing his earnings from 35 to 55 cents an hour. Marion not only held on to her job in the laundry, but began to earn additional money as a babysitter. By pooling their earnings and living very frugally, the Blumenthals were now able to move from the community-sponsored quarters in Peoria to a modest apartment of their own. But best of all for Marion was her progress at school. By getting extra help with English after school and by attending summer school, I was skipped that fall to junior high. For the first time, I had that wonderful feeling of belonging. Happily, I had also gotten some good advice from one of the mothers for whom I babysat. She noticed my tendency to eat too rich foods as a way of compensating for my years of hunger, and she gently advised me about the importance of maintaining a good appearance. I listened to her as I might not have to my own mother, and I soon began to slim down. Being accepted by the boys and girls in my class was enough compensation for me. The Blumenthals found that Peoria was turning out to be a comfortable and secure place to live after all. There were varied opportunities for employment, there was a good public school system, and there was a Jewish religious community. By the time Marian was in high school, she was working part-time in one of the city's department stores. I sold house dresses at Zold's department store, she recalled. One for $1.59, two for $3. The store was owned by Henrietta Zold's nephews. Henrietta Zold, who had died in 1945 at the age of 85, was one of the founders of Hadassah, which was organized in 1912 to promote a Jewish homeland in Palestine. She was the first president of Hadassah and also the director of a youth Aliyah program, similar to the one we'd taken part in Holland. Albert and I had also started to teach Sunday school classes, which brought in a few extra dollars. Somehow we seemed to find time for work, school, and a bit of social life. I also became more active in the Peoria religious community and began to attend synagogue services. The High Holy Days of 1951 found Marian seated in the women's balcony of Peoria's Orthodox synagogue. In this branch of the Jewish faith, it was traditional for men and women to be separated at services, but a small section at the rear of the balcony had been reserved for students attending Peoria's Bradley University. I will always remember what I was wearing on the fast day of Yom Kippur that autumn. It was a knitted navy blue wool jersey dress with an embroidered motif in red near the right shoulder. The dress was a hand-me-down that I had been lucky to receive, for I could never have afforded something as lovely as that new. A number of Bradley students, mostly young men, were gathered behind us. When I glanced around, I noticed one who was staring at me intently. I tried to put my mind on the services, but it was hard not to take just one more look. When I did, his eyes were still on me. I was 16 at the time and a sophomore in high school. I had only recently started dating and was enjoying going out with a variety of boys. I never dreamed of getting serious with any one person. I was certain that that would not happen for years to come. When the service ended, the young man approached Marian and asked her very politely if he could walk her home from the synagogue. As they strolled along on that Yom Kippur afternoon, Marian learned that the young man's home was in the Long Island, New York community of Woodmere, a place that she had never heard of. He had fine manners and spoke lovingly of his family back home, consisting of his parents and his sister Naomi. He himself was 19 and had 3 more years of college. Somehow, Marian said, I knew even then that this person was someone special. Already my new admirer seemed to have made up his mind that we were meant for each other. And as our courtship continued, lengthening into a period of almost 2 years, I began to realize that he was the man with whom I would spend the rest of my life. His name was Nathaniel Lazan.